Welcome to Care Smarts 360 On Air, a home care podcast. I'm Mike Palladino, a senior account executive here at Care Smarts 360. Happy to bring a very exciting topic of conversation today, which is making the most of resources when it comes to financial planning for senior care. Proactive financial planning is the cornerstone of a secure and dignified senior care experience. The cost of care, whether in-home assistance, assisted living, skilled nursing care, all of these things can be substantial. Planning ahead ensures your loved ones have the resources to afford the desired level of care without jeopardizing financial security in the later years of life. The first step involves a comprehensive financial assessment. This includes calculating income streams like Social Security, pensions, and retirement savings, while also factoring in ongoing expenses. Understanding these numbers allows for realistic budgeting, potential adjustments to lifestyle or care options. Exploring long-term care insurance can also be a wise strategy, mitigating the financial burden of future needs. Next, you got to consider optimizing your assets. Working with a financial advisor can help navigate strategies like downsizing a home or utilizing reverse mortgages to free up capital for senior care expenses. Transparency with loved ones is crucial, fostering open communication about financial expectations and potential care needs as well. Today, we have on the panel Gabrielle Pumpian, Chief Growth Officer, at Cheer Home Care, which provides quality home care for seniors and their families in their home setting with support and oversight needed for them to receive high-value services. Welcome to the podcast, Gabby.
Thanks, Mike. So excited to be here.
Yeah, likewise. Happy to have you on. Obviously, there's such challenges across the board within our space, but financial planning is something that we've started to see as more of a burning platform topic of conversation, if you will. And it's one of those things that I don't know if there's really a direct solution for, but I think naturally in this space, the one thing we always try to push, especially for my own messaging, is clearly communicating what the possibilities are and what the expectations should be when it comes to home care and home care services. Now, it's a tough thing to plan for. Sometimes there's unexpected events that occur. And that's why we're so excited to talk to you about this topic, as I'm sure you'll have amazing insights to share that our audience can certainly take on. So, Gabby, with that said, I'd love to start asking you a couple of questions to really better understand your expertise and obviously share this knowledge with our audience. So the first question I wanted to get to is long-term care insurance a viable option, and what factors must be considered when evaluating the different plans?
Great. Well, I think before we jump into the long-term care insurance, we really need to just get a clear understanding of the shifting demographics and the growing population of baby boomers who
Yeah,
are now retiring and the silver tsunami, as it's been called, of people who need the help. And the baby boomer generation is super interesting because we've never had a population this large. We've never had a population this career focused. And so what we see people who are very driven in their like midlife to save money and have careers and have a family, but we also see them having less children. And so it's important to think
yeah,
about how are those who don't have children or their children live afar going to be able to manage with aging in place, because we know that 9 out of 10 people do want to age in their home.
yeah,
So one of the ways to plan and think about that, and what I've seen recently, is the amount of clients or older adults that do have a long-term care insurance policy and how and when to utilize it. So I'm going to talk about things like you said to consider if it's a viable option. Yes, I think insurance is extremely valuable tool to have in your back pocket. It's a replacement of income, right? So
mm,
we hope we never have to use it, but when
yeah,
we need it, it's there. So if we look at long-term care insurance as a way to provide income when we have a higher cost of living, it's very viable. A lot of people do want to self-insure. And so, first and foremost, working with a financial planner, getting advice from trusted advisors around could I self insure or should I think about investing in a long term care insurance is always the first place to start. Um, And then looking at options, luckily today and in the future, we're going to have more and more options to purchase insurance.
Hmm.
Back, 40, 50 years ago, it was a typical straight policy. You invest in it, you pay a yearly premium, and then you use it, or if you don't, you lose it. Well,
Yeah.
nowadays, insurance companies are getting more creative,
Hmm.
and even life insurance companies are offering a hybrid policy or an underwriting process to tie in benefit for care, meaning needing assistance with activities of daily living, which is a non-medical need, as an inclusion into the policy for their beneficiaries. So, um, in our business at Cheer Home Care, over half of our clients have a long-term care insurance policy, and that's because we're looking to be a long-term solution. So
Yeah.
I think also people think medical care or their Medicare benefit may cover some of the cost of non-medical care, but right now it doesn't for the most
No.
part.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you've raised such amazing points, and what I always think about, and this is a topic I've been like researching and just hearing more about over the course of the last 6 months, even, was the baby boomer generation and how there's going to be such a need, an influx, basically, of individuals that are going to need services for medical needs, non-medical needs, ADL assistance, that kind of thing. And one thing that I've seen, just personally, based on my experience in the industry, just people I've spoken with over the past couple of years, is since COVID. When COVID happened, there was such a push for individuals that need assistance. My grandfather being one person individual that I can think of off the top of my
Hmm.
head. He's 95, love him, strong as an ox, but he's old, so he needs assistance, right? But he was always super adamant. I'm not leaving my home. He's an Italian guy straight off the boat, like typical old
Hmm.
Italian guy, barely speaks English. And he was like, you know what? I'm happy to pay for it in my home. And there was also those horror stories that we saw, and people were, in a facility or long-term care or assisted living, and they were ill, but family members couldn't go and see them. And this just raised the topic of aging in place, where now home care, non-medical or healthcare related services through Medicare, Medicaid, et cetera, are now really a focal point for people that want to stay home. But with that comes an added cost. So there's now the financial aspect of what it means to age in place or get assistance at home. And that's again why I'm super excited to have this conversation with you, because there's so many different like avenues. There's like a web, like a diagram of like how many different ways you can take the conversation. That's just one of them. There's so many, but again, I think that's a really important aspect of this is the generations getting older, and the just changing of landscape with how people perceive healthcare and home care related services now.
Yeah. And just to share some statistics that I recently heard, 70% of people who are 65 and older will develop a long-term care need in their lifetime.
Wow,
And if you look at the population of 65 and older and the growth, today we have 56 million people 65 and older. By 2050, so 25 years from now, we're going to have 85 million.
that is a crazy stat.
Staggering.
Yeah.
And for those who are 85 and older, right now we have about a 7 million population. And in 2050, that's going to be 20 million.
That's it's pretty
That's
incredible to think about that, because what's staggering about that too, like you mentioned, is that's not that far away. 2050
no,
seems
it's
light years
25 years
away. It's like,
from
oh,
now.
2050, it's so far. That's 25, 26, 25 years from now. And that's something that we really should be thinking of, because by that point, like you mentioned, those numbers are doubling, almost tripling in some cases. And that's a huge
It's a
problem that
huge
we keep
shift.
yeah, and it's hopefully not going to create too many problems, but I think there's been naturally the idea of like moving the goalposts further and further from the true challenges that we experience in our industry. And
Mhm.
hopefully we can work together. And this is part of the whole collaborative approach many people are now taking,
Mhm.
is just finding solutions. Because I think at the end of the day, we have the same end goal, and it's just a matter of how we all get there together, right? And again, this is one small component of that bigger picture.
Yeah, and not to bring any gloom, but we're also coupled at the same time with less people who are younger, right? The
Hmm.
scales are tipping for the first time ever in history where we have
Yeah,
a smaller, younger demographic than we do an older. The declining fertility rate in the United States and across a lot of developed nations is it's going down. And so
yeah,
the question is who's going to care for folks if people don't have their own family to do that, which is typically free for them, they're going to need to hire in assistants. And we
Yep.
as a home care industry are growing. We need more entrepreneurial folks who are willing to get into this
Yep.
business and hire good people. But we also need to hire staff. And you survey any home care agency in the country or in Canada
Yep.
as well, and the number one pain point is staffing, right?
Staffing. The
So
shortages everywhere. And it's
yeah.
been attrition rates are like an all-time high. And like I feel like every year I'm saying that where it's like an all-time high again, an all-time high again. And there's a lot of I had actually a podcast on this topic a couple of weeks
Mhm.
back. And there was a not to derail our conversation because there's a few more questions I want to get to, but one thing that stood out to me, and again, this varies state by state, even country by country, but we'll focus on North America, where caregivers in certain states are paid, 15, 16, $17 an hour to do the
Mhm.
job, especially if it's Medicaid programs or state funded programs. But minimum wage is now kind of close to that number, whereas people are
Mhm.
having the conversation, should I go work at a fast food chain or should I do a thankless job in most cases, which is non-medical or medical home care? So I know the private sector pays a lot more, but when you're talking about like state funded programs, especially Medicaid, where we know has been like lagging behind immensely when it comes to payout rates and things like
Mm.
that. People have those conversations. Do I want to just go make maybe $1 or two less per hour, but have a job that isn't going to really create all these other things like that are stressful, right? And
Right.
thankless, really.
Yeah. And I mean, the cost of home care services in the last decade has increased. I just saw a statistic 40%. And why has the cost increased 40% in a 10-year period is because of the cost of labor.
Yeah,
Strictly. It's not because we're doing anything more expensive or we have nicer offices or anything like that. It's strictly because of the cost of labor, like you said. So agencies have to be really innovative to attract clients who can afford them and are willing to make that commitment and build that trust. And
yeah,
then agencies have to hire and retain high quality caregivers. So in all of this, it's coming back to like money and financial planning. And I think a lot of people think about home care and healthcare in like a crisis moment. Okay, if I go to
yeah.
the hospital, then I'll call home care. Or if I get dementia, then I'll call,
It's
then I'll move to
reactionary,
independent
right?
living. Well,
Hmm.
this conversation today is about planning, and that's my love language.
Yeah,
I have I have so much personal experience with trying to plan and having some of these hard conversations, which I will share in a little bit, but also just ensuring that we're setting ourselves up for success for the future and not waiting on a crisis. And then
yeah,
home care becomes a value-based service because people start earlier. Same with something like hospice care, where the earlier you start, the more value and benefit you're going to get from the service. So I'm a huge proponent for finding a way. If you have a long-term care insurance policy that you've been investing in for the last 30 years, and you're starting to notice that you're having you're 70 years old now and you're retired and you're starting to have trouble with some basic things like you fell recently while you were trying to get up off the toilet, or you're not driving anymore because your eyesight's going bad. Whatever the thing is, you should try to submit a claim and see if you qualify to start using your policy.
yeah,
Because then it's not a big of an out of pocket cost burden at the beginning. We have clients on service that they're just getting enough care during the week or during the day to fall within the guidelines of their policy. So they're not having any additional out of pocket. And then when something major happens, a turn of events, a needs change, they're already with a trusted provider. It
hmm
takes one phone call to get, more care in place.
hmm
And the client's ultimately going to have a better experience because they've already built trust with a provider.
Yeah. And again, this proactive approach, this is all part of the conversations I've been having with similar influencers of different like topics, right? Or different expertise, but it's just that proactiveness and not waiting until, I think one of the things that stood out to me was when you're reactive, you're likely going to settle, and maybe that's not the right word, but we'll use it in this case, settle on a provider that maybe wasn't the best fit, but they were available, right? Whereas when you're proactive, you can do your diligence, make sure it's the right fit, because we all know the outcomes of a home care service or medical related service in the home. When you're proactive and you have a really good fit, you're likely to have a better outcome. When you're reactive and just get a first come, first serve, whoever's there can even, provide assistance. Not to say it'll be a bad outcome, but you're not really doing the best to set yourself up for success, right? And I think that's
Mm.
really where this conversation lies, is being that proactive individual that's really considering all the options. And when our loved ones, God forbid, when they get to that point and need some sort of care or assistance, we're there to support them both financially and as a person that's looking out for them too.
Right, right. And so just to go back to your question about long-term care, in order to qualify, you definitely have to meet certain criteria. I'm not an insurance expert, so I'm not going to pretend like I know all the nuts and bolts. I do know the basics. I believe you have to be under 65. I believe you cannot have a diagnosis of any kind of chronic condition. You have to be relatively healthy and younger to qualify to get a policy. Once that policy is in place and you're paying into it, and then you come to a point, like I said, you're starting to see these kind of warning signs of maybe wanting to file a claim or at least start the process. Um, it can be very overwhelming. We partner with a long-term care insurance advocate. Her sole job is to help claimants get the maximization of their policy.
Mm,
He has hundreds of stories where one little thing, just like if you're, going through a government assisted program, you fill out something wrong, one little thing wrong on your insurance claim, gets pushed out or
yep.
thrown out. And
Got to
when
resubmit
you're
it
sick,
again. Yeah.
yeah, or when you're disabled or you're sick or you're going through a health situation or a big change, a lot of people give up. They're like,
Yep.
it's too much of a bother. I'm not going to use it.
I'm just gonna be uncomfortable instead, right?
Oh,
Or
and I'm going to
and
spend more money,
yeah.
and I'm not going to get what I invested in. So,
Yep.
there are a few probably of these long-term care insurance advocates. I highly, highly recommend people get in touch with them if they're having trouble filing their own claim. And then we, as a home care agency, in our assessment process, we're always asking if the client has a policy,
Hmm.
and then we offer for a small fee to manage the claim for them as well.
Oh,
Um,
lovely.
yeah. So, but you got to do your due diligence. Like you said, not every home care company has a streamlined long-term care insurance process.
No,
So you want
most
to
that I've seen
find
don't
a
actually, to
lot
be
of them
honest.
don't. I've
Yeah.
worked for some that don't. But it's really important because we still bill directly to the client, and then the client pays us, and then we submit everything necessary to the insurance company to back up the claim that they then reimburse the client. And that's
Right.
another thing. Like, um, people should know that there still is kind of this like wheel of payment for most home care agencies. So they still have to be able to have the means to pay for the service and then get
Yeah.
the reimbursement. But
Yeah. Yeah, it's everything you're sharing, I can echo with my experience working with thousands of agencies across the country, US and Canada. It's, I feel like most individual agencies are trying to solve for these things. Some have gotten it right,
mhm,
some have not a clue where to start, and other cases there's just not a lot of resources or support to tell them how to do it properly, which is another issue, right?
right.
But that's probably another conversation. But
Yeah.
I think just kind of circling back to the main question, it was just being proactive and also making sure you're asking the right questions and leveraging, the resources that are available to make sure you're taking full advantage of what is possible based on the needs of that individual.
Yeah. And just to share a story around long-term care insurance, I'm an only child and I don't live near my parents. We live in the same state, but we're like 1,000 miles away.
Wow.
A few years ago, I decided to have the kind of the hard, uncomfortable conversation with my parents and ask them, like, have you done any planning? I'm in this industry. I can't, I can't be a statistic, so I got to get
Yeah.
into this. So we had a chat. We took a nice walk by a lake, the setting and the scene. It was
Serene.
calm.
Yeah.
It's important though, right? Because it's a stressful, it could be a tough conversation.
Yeah.
And I just asked them, I said, do you guys feel like you're financially set up for your future and the cost of aging? And do you realize how much it does cost? Let me explain because I'm in this business. And they said, we're not. And I said, okay. And I was prepared to just receive whatever, answer without judgment. And I said, since you haven't prepared or you don't have a financial planner that you're working with, may I suggest one and one that I know will look at aging costs and see what kind of solutions or products that they can bring in to help support you guys, because I have a family. I pretty much asked, am I expected to help pay for your aging costs? And
Hmm.
in like a nicer way.
Yeah.
So long story short, about 6 months later, they had a financial plan drawn up by a planner here in San Diego that I trust and I referred them to. She did for both my dad and my mom. My mom was
Amazing.
able to qualify for a long-term care insurance hybrid policy through a life insurance policy. And the LTC allotted a smaller amount, not full-time care, but part-time care once the policy is initiated for eternity, until she passed
Wow.
away.
Yeah.
Not 6 months later, my mom was diagnosed with terminal cancer. My dad was diagnosed with Parkinson's. I live 1,000 miles away. How are we going to do this? Well, my mom was able to enact her policy because she now could use it.
Hmm.
And she is doing very well, largely because she has the support of a wonderful team of caregivers
Yeah.
that not only helped her through her darkest moments and her hardest times going through chemo, but gave my dad the space and respite that he needs to take care of himself so that they can have a healthy relationship. So it is important.
Yeah, I don't think you're
If you
gonna get a
build
better story
child.
than that one, right? Like I think it's
Yeah.
so real and it's so raw, and it's crazy to think that you had this almost like epiphany of like I need to have this conversation, and so close after that it was used and there was a need. And I just think about all the individuals that don't think that way and have these things that come up out of the like we can't predict
Most.
what's
It's
gonna
most
happen, right?
people.
Exactly. And
But I'll tell you that age 65, so I knew my mom was turning 65, and usually that's the cap for getting a long-term care insurance policy. So you can use that age of your parents if they're
yeah,
relatively healthy now, but talk to them before they turn 65, and consider yourself what you can do before you're
yeah,
65 or
yeah. Yeah, thankfully, both my parents, I have to say, have really well prepared for the later stages of life, through a few moves with like buying and selling some homes. So they've really tried to set themselves up financially. And they've also moved into it's like a townhome condo community. So there's like, snow removal, there's grass cutting, there's maintenance of everything. So they don't really have to do much around the house anymore other than like maintain theirs. Um, and they've also planned for these things given that my mom was actually a nurse in home care. She worked in home care with the coordinators in hospitals, with case managers out in the field, so she saw firsthand kind of what that looks like as an individual at that age. And she said to herself, I'm not going to struggle when these things ultimately become a need for me. And thankfully, they're both really, I'm going to knock on wood, they're both in very good health right now. My dad is turning 66 this year, and my mother is 62. So,
Mhm.
right in that prime age. And
Right in it. Yeah.
yeah, and I think they are well prepared. And we're a family of five. I have two siblings, and we
Mm.
also kind of took it upon ourselves to make sure like they did everything for us when we were kids. We're gonna return the favor if needed when they're at that age. And the one thing I've committed to them was if it ever becomes a need where you need assistance or care, we'll do everything we can to keep you at home. And I think that was something that across the board in my little family unit was something that was really meaningful to all of us, just because again we've got that firsthand experience of long-term care facilities or group homes or assisted living centers, and the challenges that come with those and cases. Not to say they're not a great option, because they
Oh,
certainly are, but I
yes,
think there's just inherently some challenges for those that can stay home. I think that's usually the preferred way.
absolutely.
Yeah.
But in order to do so, it takes a lot of planning
Yeah.
and it takes a village, and
Yeah,
it's
really
like
does.
raising a baby, right? It's like
Yeah.
you're gonna have a baby, you prepare the nursery, you get the right type of bed, you get the changing table. Well, as you get older, you get your walker and you get your commode or
And you
your
gotta
sleep right,
also baby
you get your
proof
grab bar.
everything, right? Like put all
Yeah.
the things on the cupboards and the stairs and make sure there's so many things, especially when they start. I don't have any children, but my brother and my fiance's sister do. They each have two of their own, and seeing them go through the stages, especially when they start to walk or crawl or move around, it's like a completely different world. You're like the people think the first year. Again, I can't say this by extension, not because of personal experience, but they say the first year seems tough, and then after the first year, they're like, I wish I was in the first year again, because they don't move like little potatoes, or they just kind of sit around. You just gotta watch them, but it's when they start to get mobile that it's pretty challenging, but in a good way, right?
Yeah, but there's just it's a good parallel,
Yeah,
right? With
absolutely is.
first 5 to 10 years of life and the last 5 to 10 years of
Yeah,
life. It's expensive. It takes equipment. It takes help. You're not going to get a lot of sleep. It's going to be
yeah,
stressful. You're going to really appreciate the good moments. Yeah, I have a child myself, and so after having her, I was like, wow, what I do at work and at home can be is very similar.
yeah,
So
yeah. The
yeah.
parallels are, as you mentioned, pretty remarkable. Actually, it's almost like I think of the movie Benjamin Button when it's like he goes from like the old guy to like the young child, and it's like the two ends of the spectrum there were super similar, right? And that's
Yeah.
applicable to the conversation here. So,
And I mean, just going back to like how you approach some of these conversations with your own family, or you think about them yourself, it's good to have like a baseline to compare it to too.
mhm,
Um, I think a lot of people are talking about aging parents and helping parents. I think the pandemic showed a
yeah,
huge shift where people had their loved ones move in with them, or maybe they moved in with them. And so now you're caught in like a wow, now I live with my aging parents. This is a lot. You know, it's still important to have resources out there to tap into for that respite support. So you can still take a vacation. You can be a 45-year-old and still do what you want to do, even
yeah,
though, you're also caretaking for your loved ones.
yeah, yeah. It's so true, and I think again the best thing, and I always boil it down to one main thing, but in this case it's two things. It's communication. As you mentioned with the story with your parents, you prepared for the communication there, and you really tried to set yourself up to have um, as much of a frictionless conversation as you could with such sensitive topics. But I think it's communication, but being proactive. In most scenarios, whether you're talking about work or an industry or talking to people, I think being proactive and clearly communicating are the two things that really are going to allow you to be successful and that you understand what you can achieve or accomplish or provide. And that's kind of the rules I live by. I apply them to myself as best I can. I'm not going to say I do it perfectly by any means, but
I don't think anybody does.
yeah, I think you want to just try to do your best with those two things, especially when you apply it to home care or technology even, because it's going to allow you to just be knowledgeable about whatever it is you're trying to accomplish too, right? And also clearly communicate what you can and cannot do, which I think is even more important.
Yeah, you got to set expectations,
Yeah.
and understand your parents' expectations of you,
Hmm.
and you got to be vulnerable in
Yeah.
order to ask that.
Yeah, and that's the hardest thing to do is to be vulnerable, and
It's
where I've seen
uncomfortable.
and I've seen it work well with usually like within the family unit in home care, but it's when there's somebody that's maybe alone or they're widowed or they don't have much family. That's
Mhm.
where there's some challenge because they don't have that capacity to be vulnerable because they're kind of on their own. Maybe they've always been on their own, and that's just kind of how they are, right? So it's almost like the changing in behavior to help them think differently about how others can support them in those later stages too.
And that's where, coming back to kind of the topic of a financial planner being a kind of a first point of contact for some of these conversations, that's where they come in as a help if the person is alone, if they don't have a lot of family, because financial planners have a fiduciary duty to act in the best interest of their
Yeah,
clients. And more, I feel like financial planners want to be integrated with resources outside of their scope of practice.
yeah,
So I spend a lot of my time as a business development person talking to financial planners, meeting with wealth advisors, investment folks, even bankers, and just saying like, hey, when someone comes up, when a client comes in and they just kind of vent to you and say, oh, my mom just got diagnosed with dementia, I don't know what we're gonna do, that should be kind of a little red flag to think
yeah,
about. Okay, well, what other resources in the community can I help my client with? And sometimes you don't know until you meet someone that. So that's part of my like marketing and what Cheers about is, again, long-term solutions. A lot of people who use a financial planner have that planning mindset, and so they're looking for those long-term solutions.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I think you said it beautifully. And I think it's really just doing the diligence and taking due process and setting people up for success and giving them access to the resources that can certainly help achieve those things too.
Yeah.
But yeah, well, that was quite a doozy of a question, right? So, we'll move on to the next one. And I think largely these are all going to kind of work hand in hand as we go through the
Mhm.
questions here. There are 5 in total. This is number 2. Do you have any recommendations for optimizing assets like home or other investments to potentially free up capital for future care needs?
Yes, I think we've talked a little bit about it. Again, I'm not a financial planner, so I'm not going to give any advice on what assets to invest in. But I just know that there are a lot of supportive tools out there for people to consider when they need to free up assets. And the best one, again, is to start with someone that you know and trust, a financial planner to help manage those assets long term. You want someone who's going to take a really comprehensive approach too. So sometimes you think of like a financial, oh, how am I going to plan for retirement? Retirement when all my vacations I'm going to go on. Well,
Yeah,
like my parents just recently retired and they're hit with these chronic illnesses. So
yeah,
they're still taking small vacations, but it's not what they thought their retirement was going to be. And so they've had to shift and pivot into using their funds for managing their lifestyle so that they can still enjoy, but also take care of themselves and
yeah,
stay in their own home. I think that understanding what supplemental programs financial planners can offer, products like we talked about, the hybrid long-term care insurance policies, um, is important. Also, a financial planner can point you in the right direction with a good estate planning attorney. So, estate planning and asset protection go hand in hand. There's a lot of misconceptions. People think that they can only hire an estate planning attorney if they have all this money or they have all
yeah,
houses. That's not true. It usually just takes a life event to really take that first step. So if you've bought your first home, if you're planning on having a child, if you're getting married, those are all reasons to create a trust and an estate plan that's going to protect your money should you become incapacitated and can't. It's not only going to protect your money, it's going to protect everything if you become incapacitated and can't make those decisions. So
hmm,
that is a big part of the planning process. So I'm working with estate planning attorneys as well to say, hey, when I'm doing an assessment for a client who needs care, what questions should I also be asking without kind of overstepping my bounds
yeah,
to ensure that they are set up for success and that they have everything in place? Going to share another story about my parents, which they love me and they don't mind that I share this. They're very supportive, but when last 2 years ago, I went up to, or a year ago, I can't remember. I went to go visit them, and I had in my little brain, I gotta ask them about their estate planning documents. I've never seen them. I have to do this. I have to have this
hmm,
uncomfortable conversation. So I did, and they pulled them out, dusted them off, paper copies, things scribbled, names crossed out. I was just like, how about we get in touch with an estate planning attorney that I know here in San Diego, and let's have him take a look at them because their attorney had retired and they didn't really have another go-to. So luckily, I love my parents. They're always willing to take my suggestions, which I know a lot of people don't have that luxury, that their
yeah,
parents can be very stubborn. So we're going to talk a little bit about how you kind of approach that. But yes, got their estate plan dialed in. It took so much weight off of my shoulder. It took new considerations into play based on their health needs now. And they have a DNR and they have a pulsed. And so these things that they didn't have before in place, we now have in place. So God
nice.
forbid something serious happens and I'm not there physically yet, we have a plan in place. So
Yeah.
yeah, estate planning is very important.
Absolutely. And it's funny because the for me, there's a few key points that always just kind of keep coming back up, and it's just being a clear communicator, knowing which questions to ask, or even further to that, if you don't know which questions to ask, figuring out which questions you should be asking, right?
Mhm.
And being
Mhm.
okay to kind of step out of the comfort zone and be okay with not knowing something, but learning about that topic to then better advise others on how they can best be comfortable or plan for these end of life events or later stage life events, right? I think
Yep.
one of the things that most people think about when it comes to the later stages of life is kind of what you mentioned, where they think that retirement's going to be all these different things, and then they see, okay, well, actually, this thing came up or this plan changed, and then it's like you're never really kind of getting to that point.
Mhm.
And then other things come up you got to manage and plan for and stuff, right? So I think again, being proactive, we're going to probably talk about that 45 more times on this podcast, but it's being proactive and just communicating clearly in terms of, what you can or cannot do or can achieve or where you need to look for guidance, right? And I think everything you've mentioned again is just so impactful and so important that everyone should really be considering when you're thinking about these topics too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I think the next question kind of piggybacks off of that one, and we've already somewhat
Mhm.
talked about this, but again, I think it's important to ask it. How do you best integrate a financial advisor into the planning process, and what specific expertise do you look for when selecting one?
Okay. Yes, I've shared a little bit. I think I know at least in the United States, there's a few different like licensing and credentials that financial planners have. We tend to work with certified financial planners, so
Mhm.
they have a specific certification. They've passed certain exams. They have that fiduciary duty, and they typically provide more comprehensive services. So they're not just, like I said, it's not just a one way path. Like life takes you in a million directions. So you need to have a planner who's going to take a comprehensive approach to what your wants are and what your needs may be in the future. And also, they're great for people who may have complex situations, such as multiple properties, multiple businesses, wanting to start a business in their future. So, looking for someone who has that comprehensive planning background is really important. There are hundreds of thousands, probably millions of certified financial planners out there. I also am a big proponent of getting an introduction from someone who's had a good experience with
Yeah,
somebody else, right?
referrals.
Otherwise,
Yeah.
it's very
Mhm.
difficult, very overwhelming to fish in that giant ocean of financial planning.
Yeah, well, that's the thing,
So,
right? Is
yeah.
there's so, and this is probably a good thing, but there are a lot of, say, options of individuals to work with. And I think you mentioned
Mhm.
something that not only applies to financial planning, but in general, referrals, word of mouth. That's the most powerful tool, talking about marketing or getting in touch with the right individual. That's really what sets people up for success is somebody having a great experience, talking about yours, set your parents up with somebody you trusted and look at their experience, right? And that's likely going to be then used again and again and again, right? And I think not to say for those that don't have any referrals or have not experienced these things before that not a bad thing to go and look through the ocean or the giant pond of options,
Mhm.
but I do think that on that same topic, it's also doing your research on who you're speaking
Yeah.
to. Do they have a profile? Have they been, reviewed before by others that have used their services? What are they saying? Making sure they're a good fit to work with you, doing your diligence and being proactive in these conversations and research is really going to ensure you're finding the right person that's going to evaluate your needs, your current, lifestyle statuses and financial assets, that kind of thing,
Mhm.
and provide guidance that's going to, truly help you, right?
Yeah, and I think, like I said, there's misconceptions thinking you have to have, $1 million or something to hire these folks or to retain them. You don't. If you have a career and you're putting money into a 401k or a 403b, your financial planner can help you make sure that that's being optimized. Or when you
Hmm.
change jobs, your financial planner can help you with options, whether you roll that over into the new company or maybe it's invested somewhere else. That's something that came up for me recently that I definitely took advantage of my financial planner to advise me on.
Hmm.
Same thing with tax planning. If you have a child and now you have childcare expenses or you have medical expenses, a CFP is usually connected to a really great CPA
Yeah.
who can help you with your tax needs and then planning for taxes, because I know a lot of people who want to make their money last longer. Tax planning is a big strategy into that. And the tax laws are always changing. So I just heard recently from a CPA, which blew my mind, which I don't know how I didn't know this, but I didn't. You can submit your home care bills as a tax write-off
Oh, wow.
with the IRS in the United
Hmm.
States. I'm
I didn't
sure it's
know
a
that
little more
either.
complicated than that. I didn't know that. I want to tell
Yeah.
all my clients, like maybe some
Yeah.
of them are already doing that, but that could be a huge educational piece, value add for people who have, a lot of healthcare, a lot of caregiving expenses.
Yeah, well, I think that kind of goes back to the point of like making sure you have the right resources that are supporting you, because otherwise we would have had no clue. Like I just learned something new today, right? I had no idea that was something they could do. And I feel like there's a lot of things you can send in claims for is tax deductible and get money back for services provided or rendered or whatever. That's something that it's for me, it's new, but you don't know
You
unless
don't
you
know. Yeah, you can
exactly.
reach out to them and ask them, "Hey,
Yeah.
I heard this. Is this true? Can you look into this a little
Yeah.
bit for me and explain it to me?"
It's even just leveraging their experience, saying, hey, you know what, I've been doing this for 25, 30 years. These are the things we can help you with, and make this the burden a bit less, right? Or maybe you're paying for it now, but at the end of the year, there's other benefits or things that are going to be reimbursed or something, right? And I think,
Right.
again, unless you speak to those individuals and you get them included in your personal plan, you're never going to
Mhm.
know these things that honestly are there to help you. But 90% of the people out there definitely don't take advantage of them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
CPAs often, or not CPAs, CFP, certified
Hmm.
financial planners, there's all different types too. There's some that are fee based, there's some that are like retention based. So there's a lot of different options out there for people to kind of see what fits best for them. But I highly recommend anyone who has a career who wants to set themselves up for their retirement for themselves should definitely have a CFP that's
Yeah.
working for them.
Yeah,
Mhm.
we can't state the importance enough about these things. It's again having communication, having access to these individuals like a CFP that's really
Yeah.
there to help you and support you and guide you, especially when their expertise and specialty is home care, right?
And
Uh,
that little investment is going to save you
oh
a lot of
yeah.
money down the line, which is something I think people in our industry really, really try to say more often is like if you invest in having a trust now and you work with an estate planning attorney, then when you pass away, your family's not going to be paying all your all your assets to the probate courts,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
Just by getting a trust in place, which is a one-time, $3,000 to $5,000 fee to save you so much money in the
Oh,
future.
yeah,
Yeah.
well worth it, 100%. Obviously, people have to do what's reasonable for them, but as you mentioned, the payoff or the value received from that long
Mhm.
term, it speaks for itself, and it's so worth it when you really break it down. But that's again, the CFPs can help people realize these
For
things
sure. Yeah,
and why there's the value there.
exactly.
I'm looking at the next question, and again, we've already kind of covered a lot of these just inherently and organically, but the
Mhm.
next question, and it's something that you already shared with us, but what are some strategies for having open and productive conversations with family members about financial expectations and potential contributions towards senior care?
Yeah. Yes, I have shared my my story. Um, I think place and timing is important, but
Mhm.
not putting it off too long where, you don't have the conversation for 10 years. So I think coming with an approach, it's all about them, right? So I did
Mhm.
that with my
Yeah.
parents. Well, and actually, no, that's not true. I was like, what is my expectation? I think there's multiple approaches. You can
Mhm.
come from a place of concern. You can say, these are some of my concerns, mom and dad. What are your concerns for your financial needs and your healthcare needs down the line so that I can be prepared and I can hear them out now. We can start solving for them. So asking is it safety? Are you concerned that because you guys live on the second story that you're not going to be able to stay in your house long term because you're not going to be able to enjoy your second story bedroom and
Yeah.
you need to live downstairs. Like if a parent said that 20 years in advance, you could really plan. You could get a chairlift.
Yeah.
There's so many things that you could do to modify the home to be able to stay there. What
Yeah.
are versus, oh, mom had a fall and now the hospital is not going to release her home. She has to go to a facility because they know she has a two-story house.
Yep.
Well, now she's not going home, right?
Yeah. Yeah, you know what's funny about the conversation about the two-story home? This is something that my mom has always advocated for and explained when they'd move houses, right? We used to live in a fairly large two-story home. As soon as all
Mhm.
the kids moved out, went away to school, or got, moved on with their own lives personally. I know I moved away at a fairly young age, never went back, not for any reason other than I just, got lucky
Me
with
too.
careers and jobs and stuff. I kind of explored the world a bit. Um, but one thing that she said was, as soon as we move and sell this house, we're doing only bungalows, because as I get older, she's seen it many times with her home care experience, being a clinical nurse and a case managing nurse. People can't use the second floor of their home, or they're restricted to the first floor. They have to remodify their home, make a new bedroom or something so they can have comfort at home. So for her, every house since that childhood home has been a bungalow, every single one. Because again, she's thinking about these things, which again, kudos to her. She has well thought out plans. So I think she's in like the 1%, but like, really has had those critical thoughts about what it's going to look like when they're at an age where, you know, they have to think about getting support, or how they can best set themselves up for success in those later stages of life. So that's something that again resonated with me, and of course my family too.
Yeah, no, thanks for sharing. Another, I just wrote out a couple concerns. Another concern could be like financial exploitation.
Yeah,
It's happening rampantly everywhere now.
yeah,
Again, it's protecting your assets, it's having proper documentation, things in place, people having, the people who you want to have access to those accounts, having that information ahead of time. I'm sure you hear all these stories all the time. My parent passed away and now we can't access any of their accounts.
yep,
There's ways to prevent that. It's having a conversation early. It's getting those passwords and things written out into and stored into a safe place, um, to help avoid financial exploitation. Another thing could be if someone is a wander risk. A lot of times we hear that with clients and people who have dementia or Alzheimer's disease, and it's a huge reason why people get moved out of their home
yep,
because they're a wander risk. So
yep,
how can we set up the home and the person, and what supportive services can we bring in to keep the person home in their lovely environment and not have to move into a memory care? Let's start planning for that sooner. We all know there's amazing technology
yep.
that's coming out every year for devices, in-home
Wearables,
monitoring.
yeah,
I mean, it is the future of home care and
yep,
keeping people at home. It's going to be awesome.
yeah,
There's a lot to, but if you don't know about those resources, or you don't do your due diligence early, it could be too late by the time you need to put those into play. So I think it's just being curious with your folks, like, or whomever you're having the conversation with, is saying, what are some of these concerns for you? Your goal, my goal for my folks, is to help preserve and maintain their independence as
yep,
long as possible. And so if you
yeah,
come to your parents in that place of what can we do in the next, few years to help ensure we're going to preserve your independence so that you can live the way that you want to live, and I'm not going to have to parent you as your child, which a lot of people are in that situation and
yeah,
will be in that situation. And that makes the dynamic sometimes very contentious and not sustainable long term. So, how can you approach this? Is all about preserving your independence. This is my role in that. You know, asking those types of questions is important. Then, like I said earlier, is asking what the expectation of you is, and you voicing some of your concerns around that,
yeah.
and starting early to find the resources. Those are kind of my key things. It's just
Yeah,
like talking about starting as early as possible. um, Doing preventative care. A lot of people dropped off of preventative care during COVID because
yeah,
we didn't want to go in, and using telehealth as a way to do preventative care is great as well. But going in for all those checks, go making sure that your parents or yourself are doing all the basic things to keep your health as optimized as it is for the long term, and not getting caught off guard with a surprise, if possible. So all the
yeah.
preventative testing that you can do, the better.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's one of those things where, and I'm probably a culprit of this too, where it's like, it's not a problem today. I'll deal with it as it comes. It's kind of called the millennial mindset, I guess, which is certainly the category I fall into. But thankfully, my fiance is, the one that does like to plan for these things. Always, reminding me, saying, you got to set your appointment for this, or you got to go get this checked, or got to do these things. And, you know, thank God that she's here for me, because if I didn't have someone like that reminding me, I don't know if I would ever go and get checked for anything. So,
Mm.
and it's one of those, it's bad to say, especially because I'm in home care and healthcare services, but
Oh,
um
very honest.
it's, it's funny usually, and this is applicable to a lot of things. When you're in doing something in practice, you're a lot of the times portraying what messaging needs to be presented, but not practicing it yourself. And that's
Uh,
something that we all see. It's all too common across the board.
mhm.
Nurses, for example, my mom just had surgery. Nurses make the worst patients because they know a lot of stuff, but they also don't want to listen to anyone else. So, telling my mom, for example, she would send me a picture as her foot's like elevated and she has a pin in her toe, and the bottom of her toe kind of looked a bit pale, but the like the actual end of her toe was totally normal color, like really normal looking, right? And she's like, does it look weird to you? I said, no, but are you moving around? Are you laying in bed all day? No, are you ambulating enough? Are you moving around, getting your circulation going? And she's like, well, no. I'm like, well, there you go. You're a nurse. You should know these things. You need to move around. You can't lay in bed all with your foot elevated. Like, you gotta be out there. And she has like a scooter she can put on her, like what do you call it? It's just like a knee scooter type thing.
Yeah.
So she can kind of mosey around the house. I'm like, you gotta just go do like a lap for 10 minutes around the house, like have a drink of water and just go for a little walk around your home. Like, it's not that big of a home. You can kind of just do it in 10 minutes, couple laps, and that'll help you get circulation going. And that won't have you worried about the maybe the paleness of the bottom of your toe, right? Like, so yeah, kind of a side topic, but
Yeah.
it
Well, yeah, I
is,
mean, the roles reverse quickly. All of a
yeah,
sudden, now you're, checking up on your mom in ways you've never had to do
yeah,
before.
yeah.
So,
Absolutely.
um,
And I think I've learned a lot by extension, given that I spent 30 plus years hearing my mom talk about home care and doing her paperwork at home manually, obviously. That's a separate topic.
mhm,
But
mhm.
and then my fiance being a very highly skilled critical care nurse always tells me stories, or like what we should be doing basically as individuals to help prevent things. So I'm surrounded by, a lot of very intelligent folks in the healthcare world, and by extension, I've learned a thing or two, which maybe I don't apply to myself as I should, but I can certainly talk the talk, which is fun.
That's great. One other thing I want to mention about having open communication, unlike you and I, where we're very fortunate, we have good relationships with our parents.
Hmm.
Not everybody does, right?
Right.
So I want to acknowledge that this is not easy. This is not, I'm not coming from a place because my parents listen to me. I'm kind of an anomaly. I do
Yeah.
think the sooner um, one who maybe doesn't have a good relationship with their parents may be willing to um, address some of the challenges of why they don't have a good relationship. Because there may be a point, right? Especially if that adult child is designated as a trustee or designated as someone in the advance directive, that person's going to have to come in and play a role for their parent at some point.
Yep.
So just again with the proactive planning, if you're 40 or 50 years old and you haven't talked to your mom or dad in 10, 20 years, I encourage you to maybe get some support in order to have a facilitated conversation. There are amazing mediation professionals. You don't have to do it alone, but it could help prevent a lot of burden, headache, stress, challenge, financial issues in the future if you're willing to start earlier and try to resolve some of the resentment, or whatever the thing is,
Yeah.
or find a way to know if you really don't want to have, and a lot of people don't want to have any involvement, then it's just ensuring that the older adult does have someone designated. So do they have a fiduciary? Do
Hmm.
they have a aging life care manager? Do they have a trustee from, a bank or a financial institution that will help make decisions? I see so many people who are older who have nobody, and they are left flailing, and they're left with like the need for help and support, and they've they don't have anyone, whether that's because
Yeah.
they've like ousted everyone in their life or they have all these, past issues that were never resolved. But I just think that we can be a better society if we're willing to try to face some of the challenges and just try to overcome. If it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. At least
Yeah.
you tried and you can't go back, when that, say your mom passes away and you never resolve something and you have no idea. Now her estate's in probate and you're like, shoot,
Yeah.
I really should have maybe tried something. I see so many people who have to backpedal and
Yeah.
are regret and just grief that
Yeah.
if we can try to resolve some of these things earlier, the better.
It's one of those things because I've seen similar stories, right? Just locally here, personal friends, family, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And you always think there's time to resolve until there's no time left, right?
Mhm.
And I feel like that's something that is often lost on that conversation or that topic because it's again always moving the goalposts. Oh, I'll get to it, or I don't have time for that, or I got to focus on other things in my life that I deem at the moment more important, right? So it's kind of the nature of the selfishness we kind of have as a society now, but also the unwillingness to put ourselves in uncomfortable situations too, right? And those most difficult conversations are often the ones we need to be having, but we avoid them. It's like the avoidance technique, right? Where
Mhm.
we do it because it's easy to avoid it, right? Until it's not, and then you experience something that makes it 10 times harder than it was when that person was still around,
Yeah.
right?
And I think the millennials who are going to be that role for their baby boomer parents, um, we our generation was raised a little bit more openly and encouraged to talk about ourself, our feelings, our needs.
Yeah,
Like, I think the baby boomers, their parent, the greatest
kept it
generation of
all
them is
inside.
a bit more like shut down. We don't talk
Yeah.
about our feelings. We don't talk about what happened during the war. We leave all that in the past and we just move forward. So our generation has an opportunity to really uncover a lot to help prevent, because like you said earlier, you hope that this demographic shift doesn't, disrupt too much in society. It's going to.
Yeah.
These numbers are so massive and drastic
It's
that
crazy.
there's no way every single human is going to feel the effects of this, either because they can't work anymore because they have to take care of their parent and
Yep.
now we lose a worker in the workforce, or someone dies alone, or the Medicaid. I know we're going to talk about some government programs. Those
Yep.
systems are so impacted that people can't get the services that they were banking on.
Yep.
Social Security, Medicaid. Those systems are too impacted. There's too many people who need them because there wasn't planning done early enough. So we have to have these
Yeah.
conversations. Yeah.
Absolutely. And it's a topic we can probably keep talking about for hours
Yeah.
on end because there's the thing is there's no right solution. There's just ideas, right? And I think we have a semblance of what it looks like to find success or what we should be doing, but there's so many variables where or other nuance that comes in where we didn't account for or like, huh, that made us think a bit differently, right? And I think that that's all part of the ever-changing landscape of things. And hopefully, I think one of the um, things that will help bridge the gap for the challenges we're going to be facing is technology, right? I
Yeah.
think it is going to be a huge focus because there's, as you mentioned, certainly only going to be less and less people to be caregivers or provide care or assistance, right? So with that, largely what solves those challenges is technology. I don't want to say AI because it probably is going to be some sort of AI, but um, it's going to be some sort of wearables or devices or something like that that's going to at least just alert people quicker and provide more relatable type of assistance quicker based upon whatever that new tech is, which maybe we'll see it in 5 years, maybe 10, maybe next year, who knows? But something's gonna gotta give, and largely will be a technology-based solution.
Yeah, I think people in the tech world who are investing and innovating in-home solutions for people or better communication across providers. I met with someone yesterday who's in that world, and he was talking about some of these AI-based technologies that he's working on that are really tools for communication to reduce the amount of time or time lapse or gaps
Yep.
in communication that happens so frequently in healthcare, even in caregiving. The typical standard agency is probably leaving a binder or a notebook in the home, asking the caregivers to document with a pen and paper, and that's the communication. No, that doesn't work in 2025. That's certainly not going to work in 2035, right?
No.
So there are, you are in the technology space. You're working on software that automates and optimizes communication. And we, as our company, Cheer Home Care, that is our biggest differentiator. Is we use technology to its full capability to provide the best value for the home care service.
Yeah, and you kind of have to. It's one of those things where there's not really any choice to lag behind. I've seen you'd be maybe you wouldn't be surprised, but there are so many agencies that are still doing it by pen and paper.
I
And when I
know.
have those conversations, I'm like, on the one hand, ouch. On the other hand, let me help because I
Yeah.
definitely am going to save you time, make things less painful. And I think the biggest challenge we solve in that area, there's two things really. It's better access to data, getting
Mhm.
accessing it from anywhere, which is important. A lot of the times, especially smaller agencies, the owners, the admins, they also do caregiving. So it's like, how can I manage both things from one spot? Well, tech, right? The other thing, which I've just lost my train of thought on, which hopefully comes back to me,
It will.
um, it's it's the access to data, but also the note taking too, right?
Yes.
Like the
Yes. Note
actual
taking.
the no the sheer tasks that we're completing, right? If I can do like voice to text dictation, not writing things down, taking a photo of something that went wrong or that I have to submit for some sort of report, getting sign off electronically, like it just mitigates and reduces those steps because, oh, this is what my point was. It reduces the time spent on more of the manual, monotonous tasks and gives
Mhm.
agencies more time to focus on growing the business, acquiring more clients, focusing on helping as many people as they can and hiring people to provide more services, right? So it all goes hand in hand. It's almost like the flywheel slash trickle effect, like the domino of when we solve one challenge, these things all get a bit easier, and then it optimizes
Mhm.
your time, right? But I've seen agencies manage like 50 plus clients manually, 100 plus clients manually. I'm working with a franchise right now, hopefully getting them onboarded soon that has 500 plus clients and across 13 locations, all tracked by paper. And I'm like, I'm speaking to the guy, and he's like, we inherited the business, and we're really trying to solve for all these things now via tech. And I don't know how they scaled the agency or the franchise to this scale doing it by pen and paper. I really have no clue because if I was doing this all the time, I wouldn't have. Right. So it's interesting, right? Sometimes it's the change in behavior from the tech side. If it was always
Mhm.
done a certain way, right? That's just the way it was. We didn't know any better. We just made it work. But then
Yeah.
that's helping them think differently, like, hey, there's an easier way to do this, right? Check this
Yeah.
out. Right.
And home
So
care, like you said, I'm glad, you can make a difference with that franchise because we have to pivot too. And I just brought up like, remember when you used to have to use a travel agent and a
yeah.
phone to book an airline ticket?
Yeah. Yeah.
Can you imagine people now thinking that that's how you had to
No.
travel?
I couldn't imagine not going on my points. I have a visa that's like a travel visa. I go to my Expedia or whatever and
Yeah.
I book my flight. And it's like basically, I mean, it's free because I have points, right? And we spend everything
Yeah.
on the credit card. But it's like I couldn't imagine not doing it that way because I can do it in 5 minutes versus calling somebody, waiting, getting my requirements out, seeing the options. It's like a day or two process that's now done in like 5 or 10 minutes, right?
Right. And the tech is only going to help reduce the cost for the consumer in the end because
Hmm.
home care agencies, the number one cost is labor.
Yep.
And then you have all the other overhead operational costs too. But if we can reduce those costs and just focus on the labor, and automate a lot of the, more expensive back office work, then we're going to be able to offer services to more people. More people are going to be able to afford it. It's going to shift just like now. More people can travel um, on airplanes because of the technology that we
Yeah.
use to book flights. You can cost compare. You can,
Yeah, with a
use
couple of clicks.
points. There's so many ways. So I think, as far as private pay, it's the biggest hurdle that people have when committing to getting care in the home is the cost.
Yeah.
So it's important for for me to have conversations and for us as a industry to talk about how can we reduce costs without jeopardizing the cost that we pay the rates that we pay our caregivers, because I mean that's a whole nother podcast on
Oh yeah.
on the employee and the caregiver, and paying people so that they can support their lifestyle, so that they can not be so stressed, so that they can show up better for clients. That's a whole nother podcast,
Yeah, I've
but it
already
just
had a
go hand in hand,
smidge.
you know?
Yeah, I've already had a smidge of a conversation on that, and that podcast was like 2 hours, and it was like we could have kept going. It was crazy, but it's yeah, we'll
Yeah.
definitely have to table that one. But yeah,
Yeah.
that is a whole beast of a conversation that I really have a hard time finding a clear solution to, honestly, unless we get, I think the best way, not to go down the rabbit hole, but it's just advocating, reaching out to your local government officials, really just being a voice and making it something that they have to care about because so many
Mhm.
people are focusing on it. I think that's really the main thing most people can do at like a basic level. And
Yeah.
then obviously there's more you can do as you run up the chain, but it's just being vocal about it, communicating it, advocating for it, right? I think that's the main thing.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, Gabby, the last and final question today, kind of already touched on a little bit, but I'd love to learn more. Are there government assistance programs or benefits available to help offset the cost of senior care?
Yes, is the short answer. There are some programs. I will just preface that most of the home care companies that I've worked with, including Cheer Home Care, we do not work with any government programs. So I'm not the expert. There certainly are amazing industry folks who are much more well versed in the Medicaid and the VA
Hmm.
support programs. Those are the two main ones that I will just share a little bit about. And I think that, like I mentioned a little earlier, I think that managed care organizations are, other medical insurance providers are starting to create benefits that do cover some not quote non-medical needs. But again, you have to be an in-network provider, a contracted provider with those managed care
Yeah.
organizations to be able to service those patients and clients. And we are not doing that right now. So based on what I do know, the two most common and most popular and wonderful programs through the government is the Medicaid Medi-Cal program, which
Hmm.
focuses mostly on providing supportive services to low income individuals. You typically have to be 65 and older. You have to be you don't have to be, but or you could be blind or disabled, living in a long-term care facility. So there definitely are qualifications, and then there's also a financial component,
Yeah.
which I heard recently that is changing. And I think I'm not going to give those numbers because again, I'm not an expert in that. But if your qualification for Medi-Cal is determined by your income. And then once you qualify, you have access to an in-network, amount of providers that do everything from outpatient care, support hospitalizations, ER visits, mental health, newborn and maternity care, rehab in the home, chronic disease management, hospice,
Hmm.
a bunch of other things. And
Yeah.
here in California, we have in-home support services paid for by Medi-Cal, which
Right.
is some caregiving support.
Yeah, I do work with a lot of agencies out in California, so Medi-Cal is a program I'm pretty familiar with.
Mm-hmm.
And we are a compliant vendor for that. So when it
Oh,
comes
nice.
time to have like EVV or for VA or Medi-Cal, Medicaid, it's important, right? And I think those
Ah,
programs certainly provide a lot of value. I think the biggest gap that I've seen is, just the funding from the state. California does a great job. New York does a pretty good job.
mhm,
Some other states, Midwest states do a decent job, but there are some that are really lagging behind to the point where there's that conversation, right? Of does it make sense to be a caregiver or should I go work at McDonald's?
yeah,
Just to be blunt, like that's literally conversations people are having now
mhm,
because they're evaluating the quality of the work and the happiness they're getting. And a lot of the times on these lower income programs where it's not a lot of funding, it's kind of a forced program, if you will.
mm,
Those are the ones that generally don't have a positive experience because it's already with like a very 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 low funding, which
mhm.
kind of speaks for itself.
Yeah, I mean, the program is there, but it is very, very limited.
Yeah.
to with who it can reach. It's definitely
Yeah,
not.
but I do think though in a more positive sense, which
Mhm.
really want to focus on those, there are really, a lot more people advocating for the program because the ones that do it well, like Medi-Cal, right, or
Mhm.
others, programs where there's a lot more funding in Medicaid or VA, when it works well, it's such an amazing solution, right? When
Mhm.
it's given the proper resources, given the proper funding, when the MCOs contract out with a lot of different agencies that provide these services where it's tracked and managed properly, that you've seen the value of how well it can work. And we just hope that other states can kind of get on board with those programs that have been working successfully and kind of model themselves after those ones that have seen success, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And with the income or the assets, sometimes people have to kind of spend down.
Yeah.
This just made me think of a client that we had when we first started Cheer, who lived in probably a $5 million home, and she had services 3 times a week for 4 hours a day. And then one day her son called, and she was on service probably a couple months. One day her son called and said, "Hey, we're gonna have to cancel services. We love you. We're really happy. We love the caregivers, but we have to make a change." And we were shocked. We were like, "What? Everything's going
Yeah.
well. She loves her caregiver." And then we said, "Why?" And he said, "Well, my mom just qualified for Medi-Cal, and so we're going to use some other programs to get the care to really preserve her assets. So she could still live in her beautiful $5 million home, but
Hmm.
she has, changed providers and get some additional services through the program, which we weren't contracted with. And so we had to split ways. But I was happy for her that if this is what you want in order to stay in your home, and this is the best way to do it, we're here if you
Yeah.
need us in the future. But
Yeah.
yeah, so you never know.
That's a good
So
example of why
yeah.
Medi-Cal is so advantageous and it works well. And I think my hope and goal is that other states follow suit because that's the
Yeah.
model that does really help out in those financial assistance programs, right? And
Hmm.
again, I hope that it follows suit elsewhere because some states definitely have a bit more of a challenge than California.
Yeah, absolutely. And then this new legislation just came out with this 80/20 rule. So a lot of home care industry leaders are talking about that, which is like a wage labor
Hmm.
rule. I'm learning a lot about it, so I will not speak on it at all today. But it's
We did
definitely a
touch on
hot
that in one of
topic.
our last podcasts. It just came up kind of similar in conversation, where
Yeah,
it's this new legislation that is hopefully, if implemented the right way, should provide a lot of help and support. But again, I'm not going to pretend I'm an expert on that topic right now because it's
yeah,
such a new thing and
it is.
a lot of nuance too. So
It's such
um,
a tricky industry. This human service industry is like none other, right?
yeah.
So it's like, on the one hand, we want to support caregivers. They deserve adequate pay. They deserve to, have stability in their economic life. But the other hand, it can't just come at a cost to the customer or to the agency. Like, there's got to be better ways. And I think that's one of the biggest issues with this 80/20 rule is that it's paying it's mandating a certain pay for the caregiver, and no one's thinking about what's that going to do for the employer.
Yeah.
So anyway, it's a lot. But
Yeah.
the other main governmental program that we know of is the VA here in
Yep.
the United States. Don't know what it's like in Canada. But the VA, from what I researched, has about 5 programs that they offer for home-based care. One is a primary care in the home. So they have doctors that will go out and do house calls, which is wonderful and convenient, especially if
Hmm.
clients or patients don't drive anymore. They have a directed care program where the veteran, I think, gets a flexible budget and they can use that money to either do home modifications or hire caregivers or do something so they qualify for an allotment of money. I don't know if it's annually or monthly. I'm not an expert again.
Hmm.
Then there's the homemaker and the home health aid program, which is assigns caregivers typically contracted through an agency to assist with the activities of daily living. So I know we don't have a contract in San Diego, but I know 2 other agencies that do the VA homemaker program really well. So I always refer to them if someone's not a good fit for us.
Yeah.
Um, and then they have a home health, and then they have a community care, which is additional resources that can be offered to the VA. And just a quick story, because I always have personal testimonials with these
It's
subjects.
the best kind.
My grandfather lives in Chicago, and he's 100. and he's a World
Wow.
War II veteran, and he lives in an independent living community. And he was living in one place and really loved it, lived there for like 6 years. And then his money was about to run out. And he never thought he was going to live to, 98 at the time.
Hmm.
And, could have done some things maybe differently planning wise, but here he is and wasn't taking advantage of any veterans
Oh,
program.
wow.
So now so luckily my uncle and my parents and we all kind of said like, let's get him some more help because he's 100 now. And I know that
Yeah.
there's these benefits out there that he qualifies for. So, it's the VA. Nothing happens quickly, but they are pretty efficient once
Yep.
things get moving. And he was able to get back pay for like X
Wow.
amount of years that he could have with this program, and now has a little bit of an income coming in to help provide um, that financial support so that he does get care in his independent living. And the weight and the stress that it lifted off of him, I'm sure, was
Oh my
immense.
gosh.
And just
Absolutely.
knowing everyone's like, how's your grandpa? And I would always be like, he's great. He's just worried he's going to run out of money. And that worry is probably one of the number one worries, I think, like people who are in their 80s and
Oh
90s
yeah.
have right now who didn't prepare, or the baby
100%.
boomers who may not have a retirement to lean
Yeah.
into, or an investment, portfolio that they've saved on. So finding ways, utilizing every program that's out there and making sure that you do utilize it and ask questions around it is
Yeah.
super important to
Yeah.
yeah,
100%. It's
stability.
being curious, and it's also just knowing what's out available. So it's amazing to hear that, your grandpa was able to get the back pay. But again, like that stress, it's something that we hope to not have to worry about at that age, right? And thankfully,
Yeah,
the
the
VA
consistent living
program,
together.
yeah, as you mentioned, the VA program, once it does get its wheels turning, it's a really great program. It just sometimes takes a while to get going, but once it's done and fully, implemented for the individual, it's really a fantastic resource.
I agree.
Well, that was quite the conversation.
Yeah.
That's all the questions I got for you today, but hopefully, those that tuned in learned something new or piqued interest and help, or will help you think differently about, certain topics, sometimes uncomfortable topics too.
Mhm.
So with that said, thank you, Gabrielle, for sharing these great insights. I'm sure the audience got to know pertinent financial planning strategies for senior care. And to you, the wonderful audience, thanks for tuning in. And until the next episode, this is Mike signing off. Thanks,
Thank
Gabby.
you.